wonderful moment for a warm and loving couple who got a brand new baby boy.
There is blood in their veins that has been coursing through royal veins since before 1066.
I mean, can you get Radio 3 on?
There are not many 90-year-old men who are still voted as being stylish.
Time hasn't changed him. Age certainly hasn't changed him. And in fact, if anything else, he's probably become what we know in Britain as a grumpy old man.
Charles grew up always wanting to please his father. He'd been sent away to school in Scotland, which he hated. He was lonely, he was bullied.
Prince Charles gave quite a number of interviews and we had never heard him speak before.
I'm very well informed, I must say.
I think it literally changed his image overnight from this boy with jug ears into a sort of rather a delightful, whimsical character.
He had quite a long period of bachelorhood where he couldn't seem to settle down, and suddenly this beautiful young girl came into his life.
When asked whether Diana was in love with Charles, she immediately said, of course. And he said, whatever love is.
Today's edition of The Sun dedicates its first 5 pages to a story about the prince's alleged romance with a fellow student.
Prince Harry is more like his mother. He's probably the most popular member of the royal family at this moment in time because people warm to him.
I don't believe there is any such thing as private life anymore. I'm not going to sit here and whinge. Everyone knows about Twitter and the internet and stuff like that.
People now regard them as part of the celebrity culture. They're not. They think of themselves as part of history.
Prince Philip is head of the royal family and patriarch of the princes. Known as a no-nonsense and tough, gruff military man, he occasionally oversteps the line of political correctness with both feet. His rise from a titled but unprivileged background to become the greatest supporter of the longest reigning monarch in British history is the stuff of storybooks. But Prince Philip's story is true.
He was born famously on a kitchen table in Corfu, and he was evacuated in an orange box on board a British destroyer.
Through the 1920s, Prince Philip lived in exile with his parents in Paris. Then at the end of the 1920s, his parents split up. His mother had a breakdown, ended up in an asylum in Switzerland, and his father floated down to the south of France, where he ended up with a girlfriend living in a boat.
Following his time at Gordonston, which specialized in seamanship, Prince Philip left in 1939 to join the Royal Navy as a cadet.
He was astonishingly good-looking. He's always maintained a very fit profile, and he looked what he was, a young Greek god.
So he wasn't like anyone else, I think, that Princess Elizabeth would have come up against.
The first notable meeting was the one when King George VI and Queen Elizabeth went with their children, Elizabeth and Margaret Rose, to see the sailors down at Dartmouth. And Prince Philip, because he was their cousin, was charged with looking after them.
She met Prince Philip of Greece, as he then was, in 1939, when he was a dashing naval cadet at Dartmouth Naval College. She'd met him before at family occasions, but this was the occasion when, by her own account, the spark was struck.
Very dashing and very handsome, and I mean, quite unusually. She actually thought, this man is wonderful, you know, as a 13-year-old could think, you know, a handsome prince, and never really had any affection for any other man ever since.
After completing his initial training at Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, he joined the battleship HMS Ramillies as a midshipman during the early stages of World War II.
From that moment on, as far as I can make out, Princess Elizabeth kept a photograph of Prince Philip on her desk throughout the war.
Prince Philip enjoyed a glittering war career, joining the battleship HMS Valiant in Alexandria in January 1941. After his promotion to sub-lieutenant, he was appointed to the destroyer HMS Wallis, based at Rosyth, for convoy escort duties. Further promotions meant that he was appointed second in command of Wallis at the unusually early age of 21. HMS Wallis took part in the Allied invasion of Italy, with the landings on Sicily in July 1943.
Prince Philip was very alpha male, quite controlling and very positive. And I don't think Princess Elizabeth ever met a man like that in her life. She was used to going out with Lord this and Lord that, and people being very deferential to her, and suddenly there's someone that comes along and tells her what to do, and drives too fast, and does all kinds of things. And I think he was just so male. She was so incredibly in love with him.
And there wasn't another candidate. There were various English dukes, all rather dim, and there were foreigners, even more dim or inappropriate because they'd fought for the Germans in the war. And Prince Philip had the inestimable advantage of having fought on our side in the Royal Navy, and therefore was okay.
With news of growing preparations for the royal wedding come these notable pictures of the royal family, accompanied by Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten.
People at court weren't sure who this man was. Princess Elizabeth was a perfect princess. She was beautiful, she was well brought up, she knew how to behave. Nobody was quite sure about Prince Philip. Who was he? Where were his parents?
He always said to me that he was essentially pan-European. I don't know what he was. He certainly he is categorized as being the Greek, but he doesn't have any Greek blood in him at all.
The general public thought that Elizabeth and Philip's marriage was a fairy tale made in heaven. Hundreds of thousands of people gathered outside the palace gates because it was the one good event to cap off what had been, quite frankly, a dreadful decade.
Homage and rejoicing, side by side with glowing pageantry, marks Britain's greatest royal occasion since the coronation.
The royal wedding was seen as a sort of new Elizabethan age. The country was in a terrible state. It was very austere right after the war, and suddenly there's this beautiful bride, because Princess Elizabeth was incredibly beautiful, and this handsome naval officer were going to carry the country out of the doldrums of war and present them with a golden future. But the feeling was very much of their wedding. It was like a fairy tale.
Before long, the calls of the people were answered as onto the famous balcony came the bride and bridegroom.
At the time of the wedding of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, his sisters were not invited, simply because they were Germans living in Germany with, German husbands, one of whom was still going through the denazification process. So, they had to be careful.
I think the British public, on the whole, regarded the marriage of Prince Philip to the future Queen as a welcome, blessed relief, from a time of considerable austerity and awfulness, and there was more rationing, paradoxically, after the war ended than there had been during the war itself.
And the young princess gathering up her ration coupons to buy the lace for her wedding dress.
You've got this wonderful romance, this dashing naval officer marrying the girl next door who was everybody's sweetheart, who was going to be our queen. It's strange that now he's cast as a cantankerous old crust and a right wing, etc., etc. When he first sprung upon an astonished world, he was regarded as a dangerous lefty.
There were a lot of people in English society, and courtiers in particular, who weren't sure who this man was.
Prince Philip's meteoric rise in the Royal Navy continued. when he was appointed commander in 1952.
Philip had insisted after the marriage that he should pursue his naval career. She wanted him very much to do this. The royal family agreed, and so he actually went off to Malta, where the British Navy had still a large contingent in those days. He was given his own ship. She went out there not as a princess, but as the captain's wife. And for the first and only time in her life, she drove her own car, she went to hairdressing salons, she met friends in cafes for coffee. She had something resembling ordinary life, and it had been her wish and hope that that could continue for several years.
It was obvious that she meant to enjoy herself. She had no restrictions. She could move about on her own in Malta. It was absolutely novel for her, you know. I think officially she was the boss. But in private life, I think Philip ran the show. That's my impression, yes. He seemed to boss her around most of the time, you know. And I shouldn't say this, perhaps. I've heard him swear at her.
The King's unexpected death changed everything, not only for Elizabeth, but for Philip too. As a couple, they had enjoyed a blissful existence in Malta, where the Duke of Edinburgh was then based as an officer in the Royal Navy. And their first tour, so to speak, was brought to an abrupt halt when they heard news of the King's death, where in Kenya, of course, it was the Duke of Edinburgh that broke the news to Princess Elizabeth, and understandably, she was devastated. People were bowing to her, and she was the new Queen, and for both of them, it really brought to an abrupt end what had been as normal a marriage as possible for a royal couple.
Prince Philip is a military man through and through. If he hadn't married the Queen, he would have been a highly successful naval officer, probably would have reached the rank of admiral.
Suddenly, the Queen superseded him entirely, and I think for the dynamics of the relationship, that was quite hard to deal with.
He had the potential of having a very good naval career ahead of him. He served with distinction in the Second World War, first in the Mediterranean. The untimely death of the Queen's father, George VI, meant that Philip had to hang up his uniform and be there just 2 steps behind the Queen.
And as anyone who would know Prince Philip would completely understand, he likes to earn everything that he does. He did not like the idea of suddenly being appointed Admiral of the Fleet, Field Marshal and Marshal of the Royal Air Force without having done anything to earn it.
When Prince Philip went off on his solo voyage on Britannia, it was very early in the marriage, and people were saying, oh, is there trouble in the marriage?
There have always been rumours about Prince Philip and girls. I remember Prince Philip saying to me, if I'd fathered as many children as I was supposed to have fathered, I wouldn't have had time for anything else.
The thing about the Queen and Prince Philip is they're very, very well matched. I mean, she took on somebody her own size.
I went to the theatre with them one evening and sat in the royal box with them, and the interval came. And I stood at the side of the room with the Duke of Edinburgh. And he looked across the crowded room towards the Queen, who was quite a small woman, and she was surrounded by people meeting her and bowing and shaking her hand. And he leant against the wall, and he was holding a drink, and he caught her eye. And across the crowded room, as she smiled at him, he merely lifted his glass and toasted her.
I must confess, my Lord Mayor, that it came as a bit of a surprise to realise that we had been married 25 years. Neither of us are much given to looking back, and the years have slipped by so quickly.
He always said that his main job was to make it possible for his wife to reign.
One of the ways he supports her is to run all the royal estates for her, and he's been extremely energetic at Windsor and Sandringham, Balmoral and so forth.
The Queen sees it as her duty to walk at the pace of the slowest person in the land, so that nobody in the country feels left behind. So there is the Duke of Edinburgh thrusting, going forward, trying to do this, trying to do that, trying to change this, and there is the Queen quite steadily walking along. The Queen is the head of state, but Prince Philip is the head of the household. He's the head of the family, so people have to answer to him.
We had the good fortune to grow up in happy and united families. We have been fortunate in our children.
Prince Philip did always have an odd upbringing and an odd childhood. He didn't have any serious role models as far as parenting was concerned. This later came to be a bit of a handicap when it came to bringing up Prince Charles and the other royal children.
The Duke of Edinburgh simply didn't get his son. He didn't understand. He had a very difficult relationship with Charles. They didn't speak to one another as normal father and son.
If he's your father, it must be quite difficult. There's no doubt that his relationship with Prince Harry, Prince William, his grandsons, they find him helpful and caring, which is not the impression you get with his own sons.
Maybe he always found Prince Charles slightly exasperating, and the fact that he wasn't able to make more of a go of his marriage to Princess Diana was at least as much his son's fault as his daughter-in-law's.
I think the Queen herself will be the first to admit that Prince Philip isn't somebody who minces his words. He's got an opinion on everything and he doesn't mind expressing it.
That's just his style, because he doesn't do small talk and he doesn't suffer fools, and he likes having scientific conversations. He likes having deep conversations.
I've always found him incredibly funny. I've met him a number of occasions. I found him quite a sympathetic and extremely erudite and very clever person. He's very interested in new technology, new ideas.
I mean, can you get Radio 3 on it?
He's very funny, very outspoken, says exactly what he thinks.
If you're Prince Philip, you feel obliged somehow to break the ice. And for 60 years, he's been going down receiving lines, shaking hands, and as he has said to me himself, trying to make people laugh. And he does that with, you know, a merry quip. And just once in a while, it goes awry.
Outside the railway station, he met somebody and he said, "Where are you from?" And he said, "Swansea, sir." And Prince Philip said, "You're a long way from home." And the headline the next morning in the local newspaper was, "Prince Philip insults Welshmen."
He suggested to a chef who was collecting an award that it was no wonder he was a good chef because he was certainly the size for it, and this man was enormous and wasn't offended at all, thought it was hilarious.
Well, I think Prince Philip actually gets a bit of a raw deal in the way he's presented. He's seen as this gruff character that makes comments that he shouldn't say.
This scheme is not a cure, it's a preventative. Once you've got a soccer hooligan, you've got a soccer hooligan, and somebody else is going to have to try and cure him of that. The purpose of the scheme basically is to try and catch people while they are moderately civilised still and keep them that way.
From the Duke of Edinburgh's point of view, he'll suggest that he's only saying what other people think, and the slitty-eyed comment, or even to the Aborigines, "Do you still throw spears at each other?" might be a question that others might wanted to have asked.
I'm frequently accused of meddling in affairs that have no concern of mine. I'm always told I mustn't take sides, and unlike not my brother-in-law, but you know the chap I mean, I don't even get onto the electoral roll. And in fact, to use a currently okay word with the press, I must not be controversial.
It's terribly easy for journalists to latch on to an alleged failing. I think he's been rather unfairly treated.
I've discussed Prince Philip's gaffes with him endlessly, and he finds it quite depressing that they are constantly being reported. As he says, he sighs sometimes when he goes on a foreign trip to find there will be reporters there, because he knows all they're really waiting for is another gaffe.
And I think most of us, with a great deal of sympathy for those of you who have got to at the sharp end, who are trying to do your best to make life civilised and tolerable for the locals.
He's a straightforward, old-fashioned military officer that doesn't suffer fools gladly. He suffers from foot-in-mouth disease sometimes when he makes comments that maybe he shouldn't.
Totally useless for a lot of well-meaning people to wring their hands in conference and to point out the dangers of pollution or destruction of the countryside if no one is willing or capable of taking any action.
But the truth of it is, he comes from a different age.
He's just a man of his generation who says what he thinks, and sometimes people don't like it.
Impassioned speeches will be so much effluent under the bridge unless it is followed by drastic political action. Well, sir, time is fast running out, and it remains to be seen whether those in political authority can shoulder their responsibilities in time and act quickly enough to relieve a situation which grows more serious every day.
I think the reality is a lot of the time that time hasn't changed him. Age certainly hasn't changed him. And in fact, if anything else, he's probably become what we know in Britain as a grumpy old man.
Despite his advancing years, Prince Philip is still known for his tireless work to support the Queen and his youthful attitude, which allows him to bridge an age gap of more than 70 years.
So how would you sum up the sort of the identikit young person you might meet? Are they enthusiastic? Are they lazy? Are they inquiring?
There's some of all. Yeah, I don't think you want to generalise about young people. It's very dangerous.
But there's no sense you have that they're less willing to take risks nowadays? You know, we hear this talk of
There's a great danger about being generalising about young people, because you can find somebody who's the exception, or not just somebody, but a whole group of them who are exceptions. I think what happens is that when a group of young people like binge drinkers appear, everybody's, oh my God, the young people are terrible, they all become binge drinkers. Well, they haven't. It's that one group who were mods and rockers a few generations. You probably one yourself. I mean, people go through... Well, you know, you never know. People become quite civilised when they grow up.
What's very interesting about the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh is they are very consistent people. What you see is what you get. They're not performers.
And for the Queen herself, when you consider that she's surrounded by a lot of lackeys and perhaps a lot of yes men, actually having a man in her life to tell her what he thinks of what she's doing is probably a refreshing change.
Prince Philip's personal thoughts on his family and on half a century of marriage.
It's been a challenge for us, but by trial and experience, I believe we have achieved a sensible division of labour and a good balance between our individual and joint interests. Because after 50 years of experience, I find there's a great temptation to give advice. The trouble is that no two marriages are quite alike. However, I think that the main lesson that we've learned is that tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. It may not be quite so important when things are going well, but it is absolutely vital when things get difficult.
There's been documented rows that have taken place between the Queen and Prince Philip. I think he once suggested that she wasn't driving well, or he wasn't driving well, and he said that she should get out of the car and walk. I think there's been the kind of rows that you would expect after 60 years of marriage in any couple.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years.
Contrary to an awful lot of people's predictions, the monarchy appears to be as strong as it has ever been. And I think that has an awful lot to do with Prince Philip. I think without him, maybe the institution might have failed altogether.
The Prince of Wales is heir apparent to the throne, the first in line to become king, even though he will probably be amongst the eldest princes ever to become king.
If the Queen lives as long as her mother, Prince Charles won't come to the throne until he's 77.
An extraordinary Monday morning, and the nation prepares to celebrate.
Prince Charles was born at Buckingham Palace on the 14th of November 1948.
He was taken away from her when he was only 10 days old because she developed measles after giving birth to Charles. And in that crucial kind of bonding period between mother and child, they didn't have that.
Following Queen Elizabeth's accession to the throne in 1952, he became both heir apparent and Duke of Cornwall.
He was then very largely looked after by nannies, and the Queen had a nanny who frankly terrified her. She was called Helen Lightbody, and she was a dragon. And the Queen really didn't enjoy going into the nursery. So that was another factor that kept the Queen away from Charles. So Charles grew up really bonding much more closely with his grandmother, the Queen Mother, than ever with his mother.
She was, quite simply, the most magical grandmother you could possibly have. And I was utterly devoted to her.
Consigned to the care of his nanny, he became more introspective, welcoming his mother back with a handshake rather than a hug.
When the Queen came back from that long tour and got off the train at Paddington Station, and her son, who'd been dying to see her, came up to her. She didn't kiss him or put her arms around him. She shook his hand. And what does that say? That says, "Where's my mummy?"
Charles grew up always wanting to please his father, always wanting his father's approval, and never quite managing to get it. The Duke of Edinburgh simply didn't get his son. He didn't understand. He didn't think boys should cry. It was all stiff upper lip and manage your emotions, and Charles didn't do that.
In 1958, Prince Charles became the first Prince of Wales since 1936, after the abdication of King Edward VIII to marry Wallis Simpson.
Now Jeff Shirley reporting on Gordonston as Prince Charles arrives with his father, the school's most famous old boy.
He'd been sent away to school in Scotland, which he hated. He was lonely, he was bullied there.
He would have been much happier somewhere like Eton, where he would have been close to his family and close to his grandmother particularly.
He had a miserable time, miles away from everything that was familiar to him.
But the general concept was that actually the press on the whole didn't really know where Gordonston was, and probably in their minds would have had to clamber over mountains of heather in order to find this place.
If you're going to send somebody to Gordonston like Prince Charles, it's going to have an impact on him. Whereas for Prince Philip, fantastic, absolutely loved every minute of the Spartan the way that the system was arranged by Kurt Hahn, and he loved the whole philosophy.
Charles grew up a very insecure boy who turned into an insecure man. He doesn't have a lot of confidence. And Lord Mountbatten, who was the Queen's uncle, recognised that Charles was slightly adrift as a teenager. He was not a happy child, and Mountbatten took him under his wing and started to prepare him for the future and to give him some confidence and to make him feel valued.
Prince Charles gave quite a number of interviews, and we had never heard him speak before, and he showed a very engaging kind of rather dry humour, and I think it literally changed his image overnight from this rather sort of uncomfortable boy with jug ears, you know, with his hands behind his back trying to imitate his father, into a sort of rather a delightful, whimsical character of his own.
I do believe I've got a bite. I have a bite. I'm letting out a little slack now. Yes, taking up the strain. This is most exciting, ladies and gentlemen. I've never seen anything quite like it before. I think I got quite a large one here. It's really very large indeed.
Charles comes forward to be invested with the name, style, dignity and honour of Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester. The sword for his earldom.
The investiture of Prince Charles was a state occasion before the Welsh people at Carnarvon Castle on the 1st of July 1969.
I, Charles, Prince of Wales, do become your liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, and faith and truth I will bear unto thee, to live and die against all manner of folks.
The acts of investiture, homage and fealty are complete.
Despite being criticised by the radical anti-monarchist elements of the swinging 60s, Charles spent many months in Wales trying to win over his critics.
I believe you were stopped in the street not so very long ago by a group of anarchist students with a Mr. Peter Dawson, who said that the rich Duke of Cornwall should give away all his land and money. How do you react to that sort of thing?
I'm very well informed, I must say. How do I react to that sort of thing? Well, I suppose I try and look upon it with a certain amount of sympathy. I mean, I think it's wrong to just, you know, say, you're wrong, you know, therefore I don't want to listen to you. I try and understand what they're getting at and why they're getting at it.
During the 1970s, Prince Charles became known as a playboy for his liaisons with beautiful and eligible women, and his easy charm with music and movie stars.
Prince Charles was really seen as a bit of an action man, and having had a string of beautiful girlfriends.
He had quite a long period of bachelorhood where he couldn't seem to settle down, and it was actually attracting the wrong kind of headlines. Was he a playboy prince? Was he not able to make decisions? Was he not able to commit?
There was always a great fascination, I suppose inevitably, in Prince Charles's girlfriends.
And every time Prince Charles went out with somebody, the press screamed, he's going to marry her, is this it?
Because everybody knew she would be Princess of Wales and one day would be Queen if he chose to marry one of these young ladies.
The obsession with Prince Charles's girlfriends became a frenzy when a quiet, demure girl named Diana Spencer came onto the scene in 1980.
I'm old enough to remember working on a newspaper and going one evening to a theatre where Prince Charles had taken a young lady.
Suddenly this beautiful young girl came into his life, and it really improved his PR enormously.
Everybody loved Diana when they first encountered her. When she went up to Balmoral that first time, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were there, many members of the family were there, plus friends, and they all thought Diana was absolutely magic.
Although she had some royal connections in her family, she wasn't the usual type of girlfriend that I remember Prince Charles accompanying to places.
That marriage came about in a strange way. It came about through granny power. His grandmother, the Queen Mother, and her grandmother, Lady Fermoy, got together, and they agreed that whoever Charles married would have to be a virgin. And Lady Fermoy assured the Queen Mother that Diana was a virgin, so the Queen Mother said, then that's the one.
Problem for Diana Spencer, and what she really fell victim to was a time warp. We all like the idea of the royal family being like everybody else, but if they get too like everybody else, then what's special about them? By the 1970s, when Diana Spencer appeared on the scene, most people couldn't care less whether the bride walking up the aisle was a virgin or not in ordinary life. But when it came to the royal family, we still expected this old-fashioned view. She was a virgin. This made her a very prime candidate.
Following their fairy tale romance, the Prince of Wales married Lady Diana Spencer on the 29th of July, 1981, in St. Paul's Cathedral, and Diana became Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales.
Both the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were delighted, I think, at the prospect of Diana marrying Prince Charles when it happened. She was a beautiful, charming, delightful, innocent young girl, and they had high hopes for the relationship.
I thought the engagement interview was terribly sad. When asked whether Diana was in love with Charles, she immediately said, of course. And he said, whatever love is.
I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course.
Whatever in love means.
It must have hurt her enormously when he said that, because What would our wives have said if we'd said on the day of our engagement publicly that whatever love is, he was sending a message to Camilla.
But poor Camilla's problem was sort of catch-22. When she met Prince Charles, she fell in love, they went to bed together, but that sort of automatically ruled her out as a future queen.
Prince Charles and Diana, Princess of Wales, had two sons, Prince William, born on the 21st of June 1982, and Prince Harry, born on the 15th of September 1984. The cracks in the relationship of Charles and Diana began to appear in the late 1980s.
She was troubled because of her childhood. At the time, Charles didn't know what the problem was. She lived in a kind of romantic world. She read Barbara Cartland romantic novels. And I suspect that she simply thought royal life would be like something out of a romantic novel. And she had no support system, no family around her.
That's what went wrong more than anything with Diana. Nobody tells you anything at all. One of the astonishing successes that Prince Philip has been and has made of his life is that nobody told him either, but he instinctively knew how to behave. Other interlopers aren't told, and I think that was ultimately the great tragedy of Princess Diana.
Charles simply didn't know what on earth to do. He didn't know how to help. He thought that it was his fault. He gave up the friends that Diana said she didn't like, got rid of staff that she didn't like, did everything that he possibly could to make her happy. He couldn't make her happy. Nothing could make her happy. She fed herself emotionally on the adoration of strangers. And this caused a huge problem with Charles, because rather than being a support to him, she outshone him. He would make speeches and the press ignored his speeches, and they talked about Diana's hairstyle or her clothes, and could she perhaps be pregnant again? Charles found that incredibly frustrating.
The Queen was immensely distressed by what was happening in the marriage of Charles and Diana for a number of reasons, but particularly to the happiness of the couple and their ability to be parents to William and Harry, whom she loved dearly as a grandmother, but also who represented the future of the royal family.
The Queen is very aware of current trends. She lives in the world like the rest of us. She's not remote in some castle somewhere. And she knew that if Diana was that unhappy, that the marriage really would have no future.
Nobody sees the Queen without an appointment, but Diana used to wait in the page's vestibule until the Queen's last visitor, if you like, had left. And then she'd dash in before the next one, and she'd just cry and say, everybody hates me, I hate my mother, I hate my sister, I hate my husband. And the Queen, not used to this kind of moral confrontation, just didn't know how to handle Diana.
It would be a great mistake to think that she blamed Diana for what went wrong. If anything, I believe that she and her husband, Prince Philip, put more of the blame on Prince Charles. And Prince Charles, of course, as we since discovered, was already committed emotionally to another woman.
The Prince of Wales and Camilla Parker Bowles seen together in public quite clearly.
Charles and Diana and Camilla and Fergie and Andrew, it's endless how the royals go wild at bedtime, and that creates problems.
When he was interviewed by Jonathan Dimbleby and asked whether he'd committed adultery, he again told the truth. Yes, but only when the marriage had irretrievably broken down. And for some strange reason, the great British public chooses not to believe him, but to believe Diana's version, that Camilla was always there, that there was no chance of it ever working.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had two wives. To have covered both sides of the street. At that time, everybody was saying, good luck, and
I hope everything goes well, and how lucky you are to be engaged to such a lovely lady. And my goodness, I was lucky enough to marry her. And we had many messages. It's amazing what ladies do when your back's turned.
It quickly went wrong.
The first inclination that I got that the marriage had gone wrong was a palace maid, her name was Michelle Riles, went to their room at Balmoral one morning to clean it up, and every single thing in it had been smashed. It was wrecked. And Charles had slept on the floor in his dressing room. I mean, it was, from that moment on, it was obvious that, I mean, all couples have rows, but this one never ended.
Well before the actual breakup of the marriage, things were beginning to be said. I can remember a very senior royal advisor talking to me about it a bit. And it wasn't until one particular writer and the princess got together and she decided that she wanted her story out there that the whole thing exploded.
I wrote a book 14 years ago called Charles, Victim or Villain that caused a huge fuss. I set out to discover whether he had never stopped loving Camilla and had used Diana and abused her. The conclusion I came to was that there were no villains at all. They were all victims. It was not Charles's fault that it hadn't worked. He was a needy individual, she was a desperately needy individual, and they were unable to help each other.
I wish to inform the House that Buckingham Palace are at this moment issuing the following statement. It reads as follows. It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected. This decision has been reached amicably, and they will both continue to participate fully in the upbringing of their children.
Diana continued to live at Kensington Palace and bring up William and Harry. But her lifestyle and choice of partners was beginning to destabilize not only the family, but also the monarchy.
We knew she was seeing Dodi Fayed, son of Mohammed Fayed, the owner of Harrods, and I think a lot of people thought that was a very strange relationship.
She went with the boys to stay with the Fayeds in the south of France. Diana was photographed cavorting with Dodi. The boys found that quite uncomfortable. There was a lot of publicity. They went back to England and flew up to Scotland and joined their father, and they started the family holiday.
I was asleep in bed and the phone rang and one of my bosses said, "Nick, there's been a car crash in Paris. Dodi Fayed is dead and we think the princess is dead too." So I obviously got up, got dressed, went straight to the studio in the middle of the night, and then was really on television, I have to say, for the next week, really.
At first, ambulance crews managed to keep the princess alive, but her heart had stopped beating by the time she was admitted to hospital. The surgeons fought for 2 hours to restart her heart. At 3 o'clock this morning, London time, they admitted defeat and announced that Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead.
It was Charles's burden and responsibility to break the news that their mother had died to William and Harry, which I think must have been enormously difficult.
The week after Diana died was a long week from a media point of view. The Queen was up at Balmoral. She happened to have staying with her at the time Prince Charles, Prince William and Prince Harry. What she was doing was giving strength to her grandchildren so that they were able to come down to London and go through the huge ordeal of their mother's extremely public global funeral.
The one thing that Diana be praised for forevermore was giving those children real love and security in their early days.
The people who loved her were the staff. She would often take William and Harry down to the kitchen to have their tea, and they wanted fish fingers and things like that. But if they had it upstairs, she would bring both boys down to the kitchen afterwards to say thank you.
Camilla Parker Bowles had a long-standing relationship with Prince Charles. From being at the centre of a bitter marital feud, to gradually increasing her association with Charles after Diana's death.
She had a grandmother who'd been a mistress of a previous Prince of Wales. When they first met, she actually said to Prince Charles, "My grandmother slept with your grandfather. How about it?" And what young man is going to say no to that?
Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles were married on the 9th of April 2005.
He was always quite tense with Diana because there was always another fight around the corner, another intense moment, another drama. But with Camilla, she understands the man, having been his mistress, having been the love of his life for 50-odd years.
Charles has done a huge amount in his life. He's never had any kind of message of congratulation from his parents.
The Queen, I think, frankly feels that Charles is a bit too grand for the rest of the family. The way in which he intervenes, talking to government ministers, his espousing of quite controversial causes is dangerous for the monarchy.
Prince Charles has not found it easy bridging the divide between Prince Philip's stiff upper lip view of manhood and his own more sensitive outlook. As he nears his 70s, Prince Charles still retains his desire to assert his individuality.
It's also extremely nice to know that I share a birthday with a biscuit, fully organic and rather nutty.
He does really care about this country and its people. For instance, the Gulf War, Afghanistan, that's why they're always going and visiting troops.
When I was a royal correspondent, never any doubt that he knew what my job was. It wasn't always easy dealing with Prince Charles, but subsequently I have come to admire the fact that we have a Prince of Wales who is not afraid sometimes to speak his mind. The Queen can't do that. Her opinions on anything have to be very, very careful and very, very neutral.
Over the past century, we have made it into a rubbish dump. The effluents we pour heedlessly into its waters are a threat to its delicate ecological balance.
Prince Charles remains a king-in-waiting, ready to make his mark on the British monarchy.
Whether he will still be willing to speak out on things, I rather doubt. I think he knows that the job of being monarch is to pursue that strictly neutral line.
Due to the length of Queen Elizabeth's reign, Prince Charles is unlikely to evoke the same sense of anticipation which greeted the young Queen at the dawn of the Second Elizabethan era. That honour will likely fall to his son, Prince William. Prince William is the elder son of the Prince of Wales and the late Diana, Princess of Wales. On the 29th of April 2011, following his marriage to Catherine Middleton, the title the Duke of Cambridge was conferred on him by the Queen. Prince William was born at 9:03 p.m. on the 21st of June 1982 at St Mary's Hospital, Paddington, London.
Prince Charles came out and he was so excited, and I remember climbing over the barrier and going up, shaking his hand and saying congratulations.
Can you tell us how the princess is?
She's very well, thank you.
And your son?
He's in excellent form too, thank goodness. Looking a bit more human this morning.
Who wants it which way first? Inside or that side?
After attending Mrs Minor's school, the Duke became a pupil at Wetherby School in London from the 15th of January 1987 until the 5th of July 1990. From a very early age, William began to realise the challenges that lay ahead of him.
kid said to William, "Excuse me, is it true that you know the Queen?" And William sort of just looked at him and said, "Don't you mean Granny?"
I remember one picture I've got of, in fact, he's going to run on the polo field, and his nanny's grabbed him and she's scolding him, and William's face creases into tears. And I remember what happened afterwards. He ran to his mother and she sat him on his lap and she soothed him.
William and Harry grew up in this very tricky household. They absolutely adored their mother absolutely adored them, and so did their father.
Prince Charles proved to be a loving, understanding, caring father of whom the boys are immensely fond.
Prince Charles would have listened to Princess Diana. He would have seen that the characters of his children were different and would require different types of attitude towards the way they should be raised. And I think that certainly was reflected in the ways that he raised, as a father, Princes William and Harry. She wanted the children raised a certain way, and she got that. You know, she would take them to McDonald's, she would take them on the streets to see homeless people, and to try to wake them up to the fact that they are special as princes, but they've got to appreciate the other side of life.
The one thing that Diana be praised for forevermore was giving those children real love and security.
She wanted them to mix with other children. She wanted them to have fun, to be freer. Prince William looks a lot like his mother in many respects, but his character is more Windsor than Spencer.
From September 1990, the Duke attended Ludgrove School in Berkshire for 5 years until the 5th of July 1995. Over time, Prince William began to show more of his mother's easy and warm character. From July 1995, William attended Eton College to study geography, biology and history of art. For the young prince, it would be a year to forget. He'd grown used to his family constantly being in the media spotlight, but now they were making headlines for all the wrong reasons.
The royal family has reflected family life in general, because behind palace gates they are a normal family with normal problems and normal emotions. In fact, they're under more pressure really than the rest of us, because their moves are all scrutinised, and if there's problems in the relationship, the cameras are there to pick it up, and that very much happened, of course, with Prince Charles and Diana.
I asked Prince Philip, and he said, "We're a family. We are a family. These things happen in families." And they coped with it as a family would, and their reaction to it was that of parents of their particular generation.
It looks as though the princess has died about 4 hours after the terrible accident that had befell her.
Charles went in the early hours of the morning and told them the news. Who knows what went on in that room? It must have been utterly, utterly devastating. The public pressure for the Queen to make an appearance was such that she and the boys came outside the gates of Balmoral and looked at all the flowers and tributes to Diana, which must have been devastatingly awful for those boys.
With Prince William, I just remember how brave he was in the subsequent days after she died, because it was his moving gestures when he went to shake hands with people, thanking them for their kind words, was so brave.
Thank you so much.
It showed that he had sort of a natural grace and nobility about him to rise above his own personal trauma.
Prince William was only 15 years old when Diana, Princess of Wales, was killed in a car crash in Paris on the 31st of August 1997. Together with Prince Harry, he walked behind their mother's cortege at her funeral, creating one of the most poignant images of the 20th century.
Whenever I see an image of the princes behind Princess Diana's coffin, and I think when any of us see those images, I imagine everybody feels just incredibly protective and devastated at the level of their loss.
There was a time when Prince William wasn't terribly keen to walk in the procession because he thought the whole thing had turned into a terrible, ghastly media shenanigans. But the night before, Prince Philip said to him, "I think when you're older, you would regret it if you didn't walk in your mother's procession, and I will walk with you." And that's an immensely supportive grandfather. I think he got it absolutely right. And there's a moment, if you look at the footage of that they're passing under Whitehall and they think the cameras aren't on them, and Prince Philip sort of leans over and says, "How's it going?" That's what you need from a grandfather on an occasion of that kind, I think.
I was outside Westminster Abbey, and it was quiet. It was quiet, with thousands of people there. And you could just hear the clip-clop of the hooves of the horses as the coffin went by. All you could hear was the sobbing of people. I mean, not weeping, but absolute sobbing.
Never being able to say the word mummy again in your life sounds like a small thing. However, for many, including me, it is now really just a word, hollow and evoking only memories.
As soon as the funeral was over, they went to Highgrove with their father. Nobody watched television, nobody read any newspapers, they just did things with Dad. Suddenly the world could see that actually they loved their father, which they always did, but it was, it was always this feeling that maybe he wasn't a very good father, but he always was a good father.
This summer's photo call with the Princes is the first at the family's country home, Highgrove. Cameramen getting a rare glimpse at such close quarters. Prince Charles and Prince Harry waited outside the house to see Prince William drive up in a car lent to him for lessons. Even royalty must use L plates.
His appearances for the press, such as driving a car for the first time, seemed slightly awkward, as though he still regarded them with suspicion for their hounding of his mother.
The photo call here at Highgrove is arranged on the basis that the Princes are then left alone to enjoy the rest of their summer.
Whilst Prince William grew up in the grandeur of Kensington Palace, Kate's childhood home was this Victorian semi in the village of Bradfield, Southend.
A red rose for Prince William tonight, after a day in which he'd captured the hearts of the Scottish people. The once media-shy prince found himself thrust into the limelight as never before. The things you have to do nowadays, he said, appearing at a new dance centre in Edinburgh. Earlier in Glasgow, the 19-year-old was greeted like a pop star as he arrived at one of the city's most deprived housing estates.
Having grown up with his every move being followed, Prince William was determined to spend his student years away from the media spotlight and without the trappings of royal life.
Royal by birth, but with the common touch, he charmed these pensioners, telling them he was looking forward to university.
I am, yes. It's very nice. Have you ever been to St Andrews? Yeah, it's very nice. It's got a very nice community feel about it, that's the thing. Okay. Everyone's been very nice.
After a gap year in which he visited Chile, Belize and African countries, Prince William chose to study at St Andrews University in Fife, Scotland. The ancient town of St Andrews on the east coast of Scotland seemed the perfect choice. small, remote, and with a close-knit student community. It also laid claim to being Britain's top matchmaking university.
The small university town of St Andrews had never seen anything like it. Prince William greeted like a local hero as he arrived with his father. Even before he'd attended a single lecture of his art history course, the student prince was a celebrity. Before coming to St Andrews, Prince William said he wanted to be treated like an ordinary student. But with half the town turning out to see him, that seems a distant prospect for this rising star of the royal family.
Oh, you're the loveliest.
Welcome to St
Andrews.
Welcome. Thank you very much.
There was an agreement, a gentleman's agreement between the palace and the press, that they would leave him alone to study without endless intrusion from paparazzi photographers.
You know, when we did this agreement, I never thought it would stick, because I know the British media, and they can't help themselves. But I suspect that they did have the memory of Diana in their minds, and of her tragic end, and of the way she had been constantly hounded by the paparazzi. I don't think the British media wanted another Diana on its hands.
This historic agreement between the palace and the press meant that William would have the chance to spend his university years as just another student, albeit a very famous one.
In the ensuing years, he didn't go off the rails. He grew up, he went through school, he got good academic results, and he found a nice, attractive girl at university.
William would spend his first year living at St Salvator's halls of residence, known locally as Sally's, and it was here that he and Kate Middleton would finally meet. For their second year at university, William and Kate shared a house in one of St Andrews' most exclusive streets, renting a top-floor apartment with two other friends. It was here that their romance blossomed, but it would be another 18 months before the relationship was revealed in the press, when the couple were photographed together on a skiing holiday in the Swiss Alps.
This was Prince William at the weekend, enjoying the slopes at Cloisters with his father, the Prince of Wales, in full view of the photographers. In return, the paparazzi and their clicking shutters were expected to withdraw, leaving the royals to enjoy the rest of their holiday in private. That's why Prince William is said to be irritated and palace officials furious about today's edition of The Sun. Ironically, this dispute comes at a time when Prince William appeared to be increasingly relaxed with the press attention, happy to joke with the photographers, many of whom are known on first-name terms.
You watched the rugby last night, Will?
Might have done, Arthur, yes.
What did you think?
Disappointed, but we're still world champions, so I'm quite happy about that.
Arthur Edwards, the Sun's veteran royal photographer, says he believes Prince William wasn't necessarily an unwilling victim. Today's edition of The Sun dedicates its first 5 pages to a story about the prince's alleged romance with a fellow student. The girl, said to be the prince's first serious girlfriend, is Kate Middleton. She is a flatmate of the prince at St Andrews.
There wasn't to be any more denying after that, because it was a picture for everyone to see. This was a couple, and Wills gets his girl, I think, was the headline. And he had, but the truth was, he'd had her for quite a time.
William Wales.
Kate's life was going to change unbelievably. She was a sort of a normal girl who went to Marlborough College. We knew even then she was going to become one of the most photographed women in the world.
Yeah.
Get in. Charles is there instead.
I love the way you remember that, but you don't remember anything else.
I remember the telephone conversation. They had a few splits along the way, but they have been a very solid couple for a very long time, which is in contrast to what Charles had to put up with, you know, in terms of the relationship with Diana.
Prince William and his girlfriend Kate Middleton have split up. ITV News can reveal it was a mutual decision, and although they've broken up before, this time it is final.
I at the time wasn't very happy about it, but actually it made me a stronger person. You find out things about yourself. I really valued that time, although I didn't think it at the time. It's all bad.
Wembley Stadium, the 1st of July 2007, on what would have been Prince Diana's 46th birthday. William and Harry hosted a special tribute concert for their mother. Backstage, the princes rubbed shoulders with hip-hop royalty and the recently reformed Take That. But rumours were growing of another eagerly anticipated reunion.
There was a lot of speculation about whether Kate and William were back together as an item. And the day before the concert, I asked William whether he would be inviting Kate.
I've got lots of friends
You can clearly
coming.
comment on this one.
I've got lots of friends coming, so, you know, everyone's going to be there on the night, and it's going to be a great night, basically.
That's
so
very well avoided, William.
Very diplomatic.
Rather than the lightning, fairy tale romance of Prince Charles and Diana, Prince William enjoyed a more conventional relationship with Catherine Middleton before marrying her on the 29th of April 2011.
There she was in her beautiful dress, flashing Diana's ring and generally enjoying every minute of it. Although there were nerves there, it was a very happy occasion in their lives, and it was the happiest I'd actually ever seen William.
First time since 1660, a major member of the royal family who's in line to the throne is marrying a commoner.
Prince William is now very happily married to a young lady who seems absolutely suitable in every way. I mean, this royal family, it's a fairy story all over again.
There's less sense of the weight of Burke's peerage. What matters, I think, is that she's capable of becoming queen.
There had been some serious training at Sandhurst. This was the Prince in action in Cyprus. The 44-week course is notoriously gruelling, and William obviously wasn't spared the heavy lifting.
The Duke of Cambridge joined the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, as an officer cadet and was commissioned as an army officer in front of the Queen at Sandhurst in December 2006, joining the Household Cavalry, Blues and Royals, as a second lieutenant.
Unlike so many younger generations who are at odds with their parents and grandparents, you have a couple of young men who are clearly devoted not just to Charles, but to their grandmother.
There's no doubt that the Queen and Prince William have a very good relationship.
William, we know, looks up to her enormously. When he was at Eton, which is the school right beside Windsor Castle, he would regularly go and see his grandmother, have tea with her. She would introduce him to aspects of her work.
Prince William went on to train as an RAF search and rescue pilot with the Royal Air Force, graduating as a fully operational pilot in September 2010.
Oh yeah!
22nd of July, in the year 2013, we welcome with humble duty a future king, the firstborn of His Royal Highness, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, the third in line to the throne.
Two years after their wedding, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge were delighted to announce the birth of their first child, George Alexander Louis, on the 22nd of July 2013. Their second child, Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, was born on the 2nd of May 2015. Both children followed a new royal tradition by being born at St Mary's Hospital, Paddington.
A very loving and happy family man. He's adores his little boy George and new daughter Charlotte. There's no doubt the whole influence of Kate has been great.
I think he's divine.
He always smiles. He's so happy. That's why we love him.
There is no doubt that Prince Harry has the common touch. Ever since he was born on the 15th of September 1984, Harry has been known for his impish humour and ability to live on the wild side. After attending Mrs. Minor's school, Prince Harry became a pupil at Wetherby School in London and then joined his older brother, William, at Ludgrove School in Berkshire.
A guiding hand from Mum at first, as Prince Harry, in formal blazer and trousers, helped inspect a guard of honour. Then the transformation into fatigues and at the double for a taste of life in the Queen's Army.
Prince Harry, I think, is probably the most natural and honestly sort of open person that is a member of the royal family at this moment in time. When he meets people, they warm to him, not because he's a prince necessarily, but because of who he is as a person.
It was his first formal public engagement. First chance to learn there are some princely perks when your mother is Commander-in-Chief of the Light Dragoons. While he was off having fun, the princess was telling the troops her son is fascinated with all things military. Prince Harry joining in, too young yet to be joining up.
Prince Harry also followed his brother William to Eton College.
He's a far more serious thinking guy than people take him for. He may not be academically the most accomplished, but this is a guy that can fly helicopters. He's been to the South Pole.
Eton's most famous pupil returned to the classroom today, but Prince Harry may find it a little hard to concentrate on his studies. His weekend was spent coming of age in every sense, an 18th birthday marked by his emergence as the protector of his mother's legacy, and as a royal figure in his own right. It was no coincidence that the Prince's first solo engagement should be a visit to Great Ormond Street in London. Princess Diana was president of the Children's Hospital until her death just before Harry's 13th birthday. 5 years on, he has pledged to continue the charitable work she started. Harry's decision to take an interest in his mother's work has been encouraged by the Prince of Wales, no doubt relieved that his youngest son's problems with drink and drugs seem to be behind him.
He certainly can be if you like, a playboy prince if he wants to be. I think he's more serious than that. He's had his playboy moments. I've had run-ins with him where he's tried to tick me off over stories.
You sort of have the three Harrys, really. The sensitive little boy, the fighting man, and the idiot. And I think people love him for all three of those things.
He's probably the most popular member of the royal family at this moment in time. You wouldn't think it before going on camera or before making a public speech. He's very nervous. But actually, that adds to his naturalness and adds to the charm.
Harry has this more difficult job of defining what a spare should do. And copying his mother, who had a similar identity problem next door to Prince Charles, seems to me very shrewd.
I think it's probably very difficult being the second son, because you don't really have a defined role. You're just the joker in the pack.
Get this on camera. Ah, you forgot your boots. Oh my God. That's another classic. Borrow my ones that Marcus got.
The attention is very much focused on the eldest child, as it was with William. I mean, Diana made a very conscious effort not to allow that to happen, but of course it did.
I'm not just doing it for them, I always do it. I always clean them. I played yesterday, I didn't have a chance. There was someone else to do it for you. Huh.
Prince Harry shoots and it's 2 years. After completing his A-levels, he took a gap year. It was during this time that Prince Harry highlighted the plight of orphans in Lesotho. Prince Harry went on to co-found the charity Sentebale with Prince Seeiso of Lesotho in memory of their mothers. Like all royal princes, Harry decided to pursue a military career by entering the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst during 2005. Harry was commissioned in April 2006 as a second lieutenant in the Household Cavalry, Blues and Royals.
We're very lucky indeed to have so many families. I know because I meet them. For instance, you have 2 or 3 sons in the armed forces of one country or another. Incredible. As a parent, you worry the whole time. I think if you're out here, perhaps you're getting on with everything. It's not the same, but for everybody left behind, it's ghastly.
Despite his father's reservations for his safety, Prince Harry saw active service during 2 tours of Afghanistan, finishing his second assignment as an Apache helicopter co-pilot and gunner.
It wasn't done in the wrong way, but it was just... Cheers. Keep that away. I was always hoping to get forward, and I got here on Christmas Eve, and going from bullet magnet to anti-bullet magnet, most of the guys were pretty bummed that I was here because nothing was happening for the first few days that I was here, but things are picking up again now.
Presumably you have and you will kill the enemy?
Yeah, so lots of people have. We fire when we have to, take a life to save a life, but the main thing for us is the tricky escorts. If guys get injured, we come straight into the overhead, puts off any possibility of an insurgent attack because they look at us and just go, right, that's an unfair fight, we're not going to go near them.
Harry became important by, being this big character, being this brave boy.
This is my bed. I don't really make it when I'm down here, which is a joy. That's it, made.
Oh, there it is.
Harry is a party creature. He always will be. So obviously he's going to get caught out. He has walked out of nightclubs and smashed photographers.
Drunken escapades at parties have only made Prince Harry appear more like one of us. But is he really more clown prince than crown prince?
Every misdemeanor that Harry's had has leaked out to the press because we all want to see Harry being Harry. And then, of course, there's the notorious strip at Vegas, which was really, really wild.
It was probably a classic example of me probably being too much army and not enough prince. I don't really want to get into details of what I think or what other people think. At the end of the day, I probably let myself down, let my family down, and let other people down. But at the end of the day, I was in a private area, and there should be a certain amount of privacy that one should expect.
He's in no hurry to get married. He doesn't have to. The heat is off him because William and Kate have had their babies, and that whole situation is now resolved in terms of the line of succession. I'm sure that he would want to find someone, but he's equally aware of how difficult that role will be because she'll be under the spotlight every second of the day.
Chelsea and Cressida both loved him very much, and they both probably felt differently about it, but neither of them fancied that kind of life. The more family and children that William and Kate have, the more people are going to want naughty Harry.
I can't wait to get back and just sit on a sofa. It's going to be ridiculous. After bouncing around in a turret, my hips are bruised, my ass is bruised because of the turret, obviously.
So I don't see any respite for him. I really don't. I think people are going to want more of Harry because he's still the bachelor prince.
Prince Harry rose to the rank of captain before leaving the armed forces in June 2015.
In a statement issued through Kensington Palace, Prince Harry emphasises how hard a decision it has been to move on from the army.
When I've spoken to him, he was saying quite clearly, I'm 30, I've reached my time when most of my peers that joined the army have already gone. It's probably time for me to try and do other things.
He has often spoken of the deep bonds forged in the services, such as with Corporal Ben McBean. He was badly injured when serving on the same tour of Afghanistan.
He's done really well with helping out all the charities as well, with obviously all the guys who've been injured.
We don't want pity, but we do want the opportunity to grow and to overcome our illness.
You've spent a lot of time with these guys. I get a sense that you're at your most relaxed with them, and that they make you feel a little humble maybe sometimes?
No, completely. I love spending time with these guys, and I like to think that I know roughly what they're going through as well.
Do you miss the army?
I miss parts of it, but that's another reason why I'm going to be involved with these guys for the rest of my life, because you know that military banter never goes. That dark sense of humour will always be there.
Prince Harry may well never be king, but he is more Spencer than Windsor, more likely to wear his heart on his sleeve, and more likely to be taken to other people's hearts. Prince Harry's life may well be at a crossroads now, but he is unlikely to ever fade into the background. For over 60 years, the Queen has reigned over Britain and its Commonwealth. Elizabeth II is the matriarch to the princes of the palace. As wife, mother, grandmother, and now great-grandmother, she has provided a sense of duty that binds the Windsors together.
The Duke of Edinburgh said to me once, you know, when the Queen first became Queen and went on tours in the early 1950s, millions of people came out into the streets and cheered. And if the Queen had taken that attention for herself, it would have been corrosive. She knew the attention, the adulation, was not for her, it was for the position of being Queen.
When she became Queen, there was still a large percentage of people who believed that she was anointed by God. It was a very different class system. The establishment was all-powerful. The royalty did not give interviews.
There's sometimes a perception of aloofness and distance, which was certainly bridged.
Well, no, I think I would twist that slightly and say to you that perhaps that's the way that other people think we want to be, rather than necessarily the way that we would choose to be.
The Queen's lesson to the royal princes is that public duty must always come before personal pleasure.
I don't think she has yet seen the film called The Queen, because she's not interested in herself. She doesn't read about herself. She is not preoccupied with herself. She doesn't belong to the me generation. She isn't touchy-feely as a human being. She is discreet. She does her duty.
There are two big influences. One was the example of what happened with her uncle, Edward VIII, king for such a short time, never even crowned. That would have instilled in her the idea that you do not walk away from what is your duty. What her father had done, she carried on. She was even more taken to people's hearts than her father had been.
The ability to sacrifice for the nation is what separates a future king from a prince.
You've seen what Prince William is doing in Australia and New Zealand. I, for one, think that the royal family is relevant. I think it's relevant probably more so in the 21st century than we really either want to or realise.
4 generations of the House of Windsor. Prince Philip, Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry and Prince George.
He's a character. He clearly is winning the hearts and minds of people. It's difficult to know what type of king he will be. Will there even be a monarchy? Who knows? I mean, I personally think there probably will be.
As the elder generation of princes hands over to the younger generation, they can be satisfied that princes of the palace have upheld the essence of what monarchy is: to unite the people.